Serenity Valley Stories introduces The Doll from the Garage Sale. It was a crisp Saturday morning when my parents decided to stop by the neighborhood garage sale. It was one of those spur-of-the-moment things. My mom had spotted a sign on our way to the grocery store, and Dad figured we might find something interesting. Little did we know, what we found would turn our lives upside down. The sale was held at an old house on the corner of Maple and Elm, the kind of place that looked like it had seen better days. The yard was cluttered with everything from rusty tools to boxes of old books. And then, among the odds and ends, I saw it, a doll. It was perched on a table, almost like it was waiting for us. The doll was old, with faded porcelain skin and glassy blue eyes that seemed to follow you wherever you went. Its hair was a tangled mess of blonde curls, and it wore a frilly dress that had once been white but was now yellowed with age. Despite its condition, there was something strangely captivating about it. "Mom, look at this," I said, picking up the doll. It was heavier than it looked, solid and cold in my hands. My mom glanced over, a smile playing on her lips. "Oh, isn't she something? She looks like she's from another era." Dad came over to take a look, his brow furrowing slightly. "You sure you want that? It's kind of creepy." I shrugged. "I don't know. There's just something about her." The old woman running the sale hobbled over, her eyes narrowing as she saw me holding the doll. "That one's been here a while," she said in a raspy voice. "People pick her up, but they never take her home." "Why not?" Mom asked, her curiosity piqued. The woman hesitated, her gaze flickering to the doll and then back to us. "Some say it's cursed. That it's been passed around from house to house, bringing nothing but bad luck." I could see Dad rolling his eyes, and I almost laughed. A cursed doll. It sounded like something out of a horror movie. But for some reason, I felt an odd connection to the doll, like it was meant to be mine. "How much?" Dad asked, clearly humoring me. $10, the woman said, her tone flat. "5, Dad countered. The woman looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "5 it is. Just, be careful with that one." We took the doll home, and I set it on a shelf in my room. It looked perfect there, nestled among my other childhood toys and trinkets. But from the moment the doll entered our house, things started to change. It began with small, almost unnoticeable things. The air in my room felt colder, even though it was the middle of summer. I would wake up at night, sure that I had heard something, a faint rustling, like the sound of fabric brushing against fabric, or a soft, distant whisper. But every time I turned on the light, the room was silent. Then, things began to move on their own. I would leave my room in the morning, everything in its place, and when I returned, items would be out of order. A book would be lying open on my bed, even though I hadn't touched it. My jewelry box would be slightly ajar, its contents shuffled around. And always, the doll would be sitting there on the shelf, its glassy eyes staring at me with that unsettling intensity. I told my parents about it, but they dismissed it as my imagination. "You're just getting used to the new house," Mom said. "It's probably just settling noises, and you're probably just being forgetful." But I knew better. The doll was watching me. One night, I woke up to a loud thud. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat up, straining to listen. The house was dark and silent, but the sound had been real, I was sure of it. Slowly, I reached for the lamp on my bedside table and flicked it on. The doll was no longer on the shelf. It was lying on the floor, face down, as if it had been thrown there. I stared at it, my mind racing. I hadn't touched the doll before I went to bed. There was no way it could have fallen on its own, it had been sitting securely on the shelf, far from the edge. Summoning all my courage, I got out of bed and picked up the doll. It was heavier than I remembered, its cold porcelain surface sending a shiver down my spine. I placed it back on the shelf, its eyes catching the light in a way that made them look almost alive. The next morning, I decided I didn't want the doll in my room anymore. There was something wrong with it, something that made me uneasy in a way I couldn't explain. I carried it downstairs and placed it in the living room, hoping that being in a different part of the house would break whatever spell it seemed to have cast over me, but things only got worse. That night, the noises grew louder. I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my room, slow and deliberate, as if someone was pacing back and forth. I pulled the covers over my head, too scared to move. The footsteps stopped outside my door, and I held my breath, listening intently. Then, the door creaked open. I peeked out from under the covers, my heart hammering in my chest. The door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, I could see the faint outline of a figure standing in the hallway. It was small, childlike, but distorted, as if it were made of shadows. The figure moved, and I stifled a scream as I watched it step into my room. It was the doll. I knew it, even though it didn't look like the doll anymore. Its limbs were too long, its head cocked at an unnatural angle, and those glassy eyes were now filled with a malevolent gleam. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that it was all just a nightmare. When I opened them again, the figure was gone, and the door was closed. But I knew it hadn't been a dream. The next morning, I found the doll sitting on my bed, right where I had been lying. Terrified, I ran downstairs to find my parents. The doll. It's alive. It was in my room last night. I blurted out, panic making my words tumble over each other. But Mom just sighed, and Dad looked at me with a mix of concern and disbelief. "Sweetheart, it's just a doll. You probably just had a bad dream." "No. It's not just a doll. It was in my room, walking around. Please, we have to get rid of it." Dad frowned, clearly not buying it. "Look, I'll put the doll in the garage if it makes you feel better, but you need to calm down. It's just an old toy." I watched as he took the doll and placed it in a box in the garage. He locked the garage door, pocketing the key. "See? It's gone. Now let's just forget about it, okay?" I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in the pit of my stomach. That night, I slept with the lights on, trying to convince myself that everything would be okay now that the doll was out of the house. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Sure enough, around midnight, I woke to the sound of the garage door creaking open. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. The door to my room was closed, but I could hear the soft scrape of something dragging across the floorboards, coming closer. Suddenly, the door to my room burst open with a force that sent it slamming into the wall. I screamed, scrambling out of bed and backing into the corner. The doll was there, standing in the doorway, its once blank eyes now burning with an unnatural fire. It tilted its head, as if studying me, and then began to move forward with jerky, puppet-like steps. "Stay away!" I screamed, but the doll kept coming, its porcelain face cracking into a twisted smile. I could feel the air in the room grow colder, like a winter chill that seeped into my bones. Just as the doll reached the edge of my bed, my dad burst into the room, his face pale with fear. "What's going on?" he shouted, his eyes locking onto the doll. For a moment, the doll paused, its head turning slowly toward him. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, it lunged at him. Dad stumbled back, swatting the doll away with a look of pure terror. "What the hell?" he gasped, but the doll was already on the move again, its small body twisting and contorting as it tried to claw its way toward him. "Get out of here!" Dad shouted, grabbing me by the arm and pulling me out of the room. We bolted down the stairs, with the sound of the doll's tiny footsteps echoing behind us. When we reached the front door, Dad fumbled with the lock, his hands shaking. I looked back just in time to see the doll descending the stairs, its porcelain face now a mask of rage. Dad finally got the door open, and we burst out into the night. We didn't stop running until we were halfway down the street, the cold night air burning in my lungs. When we finally turned around, the doll was nowhere to be seen, but the memory of its twisted smile was burned into my mind. We didn't go back to the house that night. Instead, we drove to my grandparents' place across town. I barely slept, every creak and groan of the old house making me jump. The next day, Dad returned to our house, determined to get rid of the doll once and for all. But when he opened the garage, the box was empty. The doll was gone. We never found it. A few weeks later, we moved out of that house, leaving behind everything we could. But no matter where we went, I couldn't shake the feeling that the doll was still out there, somewhere, watching and waiting. Years later, I still have nightmares about that doll. In the dreams, it's always the same. I'm back in that house, hearing the faint rustle of fabric, feeling the cold air on my skin. And then I see it, standing in the doorway, its eyes locked on me, that twisted smile spreading across its face. I'll never forget the terror I felt, the way it seemed to seep into my bones. And though I try to convince myself that it's just a memory, just a bad dream, I can't help but wonder, what if the doll is still out there, waiting for its next victim? Thank you for listening to Serenity Valley Stories, and please don't forget to like, subscribe, comment down below, share with your friends, and check out the other stories on the channel.